One of the teams going through a transition period this year that I'm very interested to see whether it goes right or goes wrong is the Seattle Seahawks. Now, defensively, I think they've transitioned into a team that, talent-wise, in their secondary, whether you look at the corners with Tariq Woolen or Devin Witherspoon, or I even like Nehemiah Pritchett, who they drafted in the 5th round from Auburn this year, or you look at their safeties, whether you look at Julian Love, whether you look at Rayshawn Jenkins, who they bring over from Jacksonville this year. They have a very talented secondary, and they have a defensive line this year that I think is going to be very good as well. You draft Byron Murphy in the 1st round from Texas, who not only is a great pick, but one of the most valuable picks in the draft this year from the standpoint of they got probably the best defensive player available in the draft at the number 15 overall pick. You supplement that with guys like Jaron Reed, Jonathan Hankins, Leonard Williams. You also have Draymond Jones, Uchenna Nwosu, and Boye Mafe, who you're going to be relying on to rush the passer. And defensively, you have a pretty good team. I would say defensively, they have a top half of the league defense. Now, statistically, last year they were pretty bad, towards the bottom 10 of the NFL in almost every category. But I think you bring in not only the players, you bring in the coach, Mike McDonald, to be in charge of this defense, and you're going to see a very massive improvement from this team statistically and performance-wise in general. Offensively is where this team, I have some questions about. Now, on the offensive line, Damian Lewis is gone. And while Damian Lewis was one of their better offensive linemen, they do still have on paper some pretty decent guys along that 5-man offensive line. You have Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross. However, Abraham Lucas is still on the physically unable to perform list and missed 10 games last year with multiple knee soreness injuries or just knee injuries in general, and ended up getting surgery on that knee at the end of the year last year. If he does not play, you have guys like George Fant or Stone Forsythe in line to be the starting right tackle for this team. Now, if you've been a Seattle Seahawks fan for a while, you know that George Fant, along with Jermaine Ifedi, probably are in the running for some of the worst offensive linemen in Seattle Seahawks history. You also bring over Connor Williams from Miami, who was Connor Williams is a guard. Connor Williams is not a center, and with Miami last year, his snapping issues highlighted the fact that he is not a center. You also have your guards are Laken Tomlinson and Anthony Bradford. You do draft Christian Hayes in the 3rd round from Connecticut. And you have a guy in Olu Oluwatimi who was probably in line to be the center before they brought over Connor Williams, and I really just don't understand why you spend a 5th-round pick on a guy last year. He didn't play last year. He's in line to not play this year because you'd rather go with a guy who... Look, man, I look at free agents in a pretty tunnel vision way. I think if a top tier offense doesn't want you on their offensive line, you probably aren't a very good offensive lineman, and that's probably not the best way to look at it, but I do think that's somewhat fair. I also have questions about the depth of this offense. Now, yes, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba rival probably any wide receiver core in the NFL in terms of the top 3 players that you can put on the field. I have questions about whether or not Laviska Shenault is going to be a guy to make any noise. I have questions about whether D. Eskridge is finally going to do anything. And Jake Bobo is a definite fan favorite for this team. But, your tight ends are Noah Fant, Farrell Brown, and A.J. Barner. I think in the passing game, it's going to be DK, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and fill in wide receiver 3 here. Because, yes, Tyler Lockett is still going to be a solid player. He's getting pretty up there in age. And if Kenneth Walker goes down again this year for Seattle like he did last year, I don't know for a fact if you can rely on Jack Charbonnet and Kenny McIntosh to be your every down running backs in today's NFL. Just because I just don't know if they are. I just don't know if they're that good, really. I think I already mentioned the loss of Damian Lewis to Carolina, but there's obvious other big losses for this team, as well as some losses that aren't huge names, but are names for the Seattle Seahawks that have been there for a long time. Names like Jordan Brooks, Colby Parkinson, Will Dissly, DJ Dallas, Bobby Wagner, Drew Lock, Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams. Um, it, it's not, you know, it's not like losing Jamal Adams makes them a worse team. It's not like losing DJ Dallas makes them a worse team. It's not like losing Colby Parkinson makes them a worse team. But they're guys that have been there, and they know what goes on in Seattle. They know what the day in and day out looks like. But this kind of is what happens when you move from one style of coaching, like a Pete Carroll, who is, I think has kind of lost his ability in a sort of way, I guess, without being too rude. I think Pete Carroll just isn't the same coach he was 8, 9, 10 years ago, and that's pretty fair when you get to his age. I think that's pretty fair and honest to say. But when you lose guys like Bobby Wagner, who are your leading tackler in franchise history, you lose Quandre Diggs, who's been a solid safety for this team for a long time, and you lose Jordan Brooks. Jordan Brooks, again, like Bobby Wagner, has been one of the leading tacklers for this team the last few years. Looking at the schedule for the Seattle Seahawks, they play the AFC East, the NFC North, as well as their own NFC West opponents. So you're looking at away games for the Seattle Seahawks, obviously at San Francisco, at LA, and at the Arizona Cardinals. But you also have away games at Atlanta, at Chicago, at Detroit, at the New York Jets, and at the New England Patriots. I don't think any of those games are going to be just flat out easy. The easiest game might be against either New England or Arizona. And your home games aren't very easy as well. You have Green Bay, Minnesota, Buffalo, San Francisco, LA, and Arizona, obviously. And then Miami in the early part of the season. So, I would say that I rattled off about 11 or 12 games right there that could easily be a loss for these teams. I don't think Seattle's going to be the worst team in the NFL. I think they should sort of embrace that they need to get top tier talent on this team. And I did highlight the draft selection of Byron Murphy for this team. And the reason it was such a good draft pick was because they took the top talented player available to them in this year's draft. And they've actually probably done it the last 2 years. I don't know if Devin Witherspoon was the best player available for Seattle last year, but they took a guy that was very good and one of the best players available. They did that again this year with Byron Murphy. Instead of trading back and trying to get these uncovered gems and, all this stuff that Seattle does, and this is the issue with the Seahawks the last few years, is they try to do things that people think is dumb, but they try to make it smart, and they try to prove everyone wrong, and they try to prove guys like Russell Wilson wrong, and they try to prove, instead of trying to prove people wrong, the Seattle Seahawks need to start doing something right, improving people that they are right. And then they'll start being a good team again. But first, it's going to have to get a lot worse before it gets any better. And I think picking in the top 5 of the draft this year, yes, does mean that you were a bad team record-wise, but it means you have a chance to add talent to this team. And hopefully they have a chance to do that at the end of this year.